All right, there we go. I think we're all set. Thank you so much for making this time and being available. Let me quiz you in the evening on your off time, man. So,
all good.
COVID being COVID, it's been super hard to actually get a hands on a code for me. I literally have only touched one, and it was only a small at this point. And usually, I mean, I don't reach out and usually talk to boat makers until I've actually gotten to paddle their stuff. But there's such a demand right now for information about this boat. I figured I'd jump the shark a little bit. So you guys have said pretty openly that this is sort of your way of retiring the Mamba, right? And bringing that niche significantly forward into time. And when I've talked to you in the past, legacy is a huge part of your inspiration, it seems. So what was the legacy of the Mamba and that you wanted to bring forward? And then what were the things you wanted to leave behind?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, you think about it in terms of Mamba, there's actually 2 iterations of it. So obviously it's kind of gone from that first one and sort of evolved into what it was, and now we're sort of departing from that and moving forwards again. I think that the Mamba starting out as quite a sort of introductory and definitely an instructional platform did really well there, and certainly in its first iteration, and then bringing in the Mamba 8.6 and that really finding its feet as like a big water, big volume boat, and definitely helped sort of push something forwards in sort of what people were running and how they were running it. It definitely became some more versatile boat than we maybe first thought, and so holding on to that and making a big volume boat was key. And so the large boat is a big boat, and it's got sort of what everyone's looking for in sort of a big volume river runner, but also not making it sort of super hard to paddle. And that's something that some people might say we sort of can be accused of watering things down slightly, but we try and broaden our boats to the marketplace as much as we can. And so still taking that sort of Mamba element, that it's like it's an approachable boat. It's actually easy enough to paddle, but you can sort of take it and progress with it pretty well. So those were aspects, and then obviously bringing true 3-boat sizing. The previous new option for us had been with a Phantom, and had a big spread for a single size boat, and was used across the board, real different size paddlers. But offering true 3 sizes and having a small paddler's size in there was absolutely key. And actually the fact that when we started running those boats, I think that was the first one that we were ready to actually bring to market, was the small. We launched them all as a collective, but the small was the first one. It's just like, hey, let's bring something for the small paddlers right at the same time. And I think that's worked. Having all the sizes there and available and ready, so people can go into a shop and not guess what the other size might be. It's just like, there's all the sizes. So yeah, legacy is important, and there are things you want to take forward, and there's things you've just got to put on the shelf and say, remember it, but where do we go next with it?
So what were one of the things that you in the rear view were willing to see go by in terms of leaving behind in the Mamba?
I think the Mamba was although by the numbers the code is still a wide boat, the Mamba was seen as just sort of really wide. The Mamba 8.6 in particular is like really wide, like harder to get over the rails. And for that, it was just really nice and confidence inspiring, in that initial stability, but was quite hard for anyone from sort of who's learning to paddle, and then also, progressive paddlers to sort of get over those rails and sort of be a little bit more, and maybe use this word a lot, but sort of dynamic and really sort of edging off stuff and sort of flaring off stuff. And so it's a wide boat still, but you really can sort of engage those sidewalls and get over the rails and really sort of lean into stuff, which is sort of the new style of running rivers, right? Just sort of lean booths and sort of getting sort of more sort of 3-dimensional into how people are going down the river. So I think losing that sort of that initial confidence in the Mamba and actually getting it so that people can really feel the boat a little bit more in the river, and you get feedback from it. And I think that's something that we wanted in this boat, is it does give good feedback to the paddler and makes you a bit more of a positive paddler for sure. You have to, like we do with a lot of Dagger boats, you have to be a little bit more assertive with how you paddle it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would certainly say that the first thing like many of the boats coming out now that people are paying attention to is the amount of rocker that you guys put into the bow. But the thing that actually caught my eye was you guys put quite a stern on this boat. I mean, to me, the stern looks like you're going for something that's bulbous, that's going to load up and shoot that person through when they don't necessarily punch out right or get that boof in. That's a lot more volume than you see in most sterns right now, which are usually kind of these long, sleek running things. What was the thought process there?
Yeah, I mean, something with that sort of volume back there is kind of like that sort of watermelon seed concept, like stuff's going to sort of load and then sort of project that forward. So it still does have the volume is pushed up around the cockpit, so it's sort of right up around the paddler without being in the way. We definitely don't have the slimmest ends, where they sort of taper down to the stern on the tail there. But we've got sort of a combination of quite a lot of stern rocker and that volume, and so when it does start to load, it's essentially going to have that sort of projection forwards and out of a drop. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. Keep the sort of stern rocker low and you'll plane out of a drop and you'll sort of get that sort of skip out that way. We've got more rocker, and so as it starts to load, that volume engages and really sort of pushes the paddler forwards. And it helps to free up the end. It makes it a pretty maneuverable boat with having all that rocker. So yeah, volume's good. And I sort of always think that as long as it's not getting in your way behind you, it's not a bad place to have it. As long as it's not going to be, if you're really edging the boat over and you're getting a lot of drag and resistance, because it can come from the deck as well as it can come from the hull nowadays, and when people are sort of paddling and styling down the river, then pack some volume in there. Why not? And then also with the big volume boat, or the large and the medium, using it for sort of multi-days and loading it down with gear and just giving some space back there. And again, sort of put the volume in back there where it's just going to take care of you. You can't see what's going on, but if the volume is going to help you, then great.
Yeah, it certainly looks like you took a bit of that license in the bow too. You really went down the front with that tent peak, which I think some people wouldn't be familiar with, but certainly if you look at something like a Machno, it's right there. It's a super effective way of doing things. It looks like one of the priorities you guys really took into this was the dry bow concept and riding really high. Was that a high performance aspect? Was that a making beginners more comfortable thing? Or was that just generally an aesthetic that you were going for?
Yeah, I think there's elements of all of those. If you look back historically to some of the sort of older Dagger Creek boats, that sort of peak's been there for a long time, and that sort of I remember back to working with Mark Lyle years ago and just having a bow that's going to hunt for the surface, but in a controlled manner. Like, you just don't want this thing to just come up and sort of rocket up on you. And so again, offsetting it with volume in the stern as that bow's starting to climb, that volume in the stern is going to sort of displace and sort of push you out of the drop. But we've oftentimes had that peak. There's a couple of reasons. It gives a structural element to the boat as well. So safety is always key, and running that through the deck of the boat. A flatter boat is going to sort of resurface slower and hopefully stable, but you kind of lift a knee and it's going to sort of start to sort of shift off, and that peak helps with that resurfacing. We've carried that also stylistically all the way through to the tip of the bow. So you've got this sort of like this point, this sort of sight, I suppose. You're looking down the river and you've got that sight to kind of line off, and it helps with confidence. And you get in those big bow rockered boats and you start to feel a little invincible at times, and they can almost get to a point where there's too much. They're looking bulky and sort of is there too much bow there? But that combination of trying to have it so you've got that shedding deck, a deck that's going to sort of cut through the water as it's resurfacing but come up in a stable manner, that's key as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think people are finally starting to maybe understand that your stern rocker has a lot to do with it too. You can't just like drive a truck over your bow or whatever the equivalent would be to just cram bow rocker into an existing boat. You need a little bit of balance in there somewhere.
Yeah, you can go, otherwise it's create this massive sort of, I guess, mullet effect, right? It's all sort of, you've got all this like, look at sort of big downhill bikes, and the theory being like if you have all that suspension, like the front's going to go through and the back should follow, but it's not always the case. You should get that resistance there, and so too much of a good thing. I don't know if we found the ceiling yet on where sort of rocker could or should be. I know there's boats the Scorch X has got some massive amounts of rocker. I think we're not that far off with the Code Large, to be honest with you. I haven't sort of seen the exact numbers, but yeah, maybe we'll find that ceiling. I think the longer you go, the more you can kind of lift that bow rocker up. But
well, when you do, make it in yellow. Call it the banana. We're good. The obvious comparison that someone buying one of these boats is going to go for, someone in a retail shop is going to be saddled with, is going to be the Zen 3 and the Code. That's just the reality of the situation. The biggest difference, I think, that might float under the radar for that first boat buyer between these two boats is going to be the chines and edges. You've really got a traditional Jackson style aggressive, something that we're used to in the Z3. In the Code, you seem to have done something a little bit newer, a little bit different in the way that you've tucked your edges in. Can you talk about the chines and what your approach was there?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at it, there's elements of the kind of Mamba profile running sort of up through the bow and through to the midship, and then obviously in the Mamba, those sort of disappeared and faded out to really sort of soft and tucked and almost into a sort of a displacement profile back there. And what we wanted to do was just get a boat that's going to, to use that term, sort of feedback, and get something that was going to, the paddler could really feel through the stern of the boat as much as they could through the sort of mid, sort of around the body and sort of driving and being forward. So that longer rail is definitely a feature that's different to the Mamba, and to talk about sort of leaving stuff behind and what we took forward, but also how we tucked the rail was important. I think this is where there's lots of good boats out there at the moment, but people just find their personal preference. Sort of Piranha boats have got sort of very, very sharp sort of hard rails, as sort of have Jackson in a way, and sort of full length in many cases, and those can give a lot of good feel in certain scenarios, but can also start to sort of hang up in other areas, particularly less volume and sort of running down sort of shallow rivers and sort of rocks and drying out, which obviously, as you know, sort of in the southeast is part of how we paddle, how we're sort of forced to paddle in many areas. So I think people can then sort of find, within that style of boat, that category of boats, like what works for them, how do they paddle, how much they want to be sort of leaning to then sort of drive with that when they're carving, versus sort of staying rather sort of neutral and sort of upright and sort of centralized. And that's where those differences between those boats come in. But it was it's a balance. We went through different prototype iterations where we had a sharper rail that's a little bit lower down. We sort of tucked that rail, brought it up higher, and then it's a case of getting it in production and doing what we want there. And it's a hard part of the boat to get right. I think you can sort of the rails and the sort of profile sort of from the body backwards, you can kind of really sort of make or break a boat with that. And people have got to look at the style of boat and then say, well, yeah, I prefer a sharper rail, slightly more aggressive sort of style of how they paddle, versus something that's going to be a little bit softer and not detuned. I don't think it's just how you find that feedback from the rail.
Well, certainly in the southeast, if you don't make it detuned, the river will detune it for you, right? So fair enough. I think that's most of my questions from a dry land perspective on the Code. I may bother you later off Skype about other questions, just so I am where I need to be.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you to it's early in the process, but talk a little bit about your new project that's sneaking out onto the internet. The Dagger Full Slice is an exciting thing. It's something that's been a bit of a swing and a miss for other people in the industry. So it's a gutsy choice. But you guys, especially someone who's concerned about legacy, I'm really excited to see what you guys come out. If you look at my half slice collection, they're mostly Dagger. So I'm a little biased here. But please tell me about the Nova and the Supernova.
Yeah, so as you said, it's very sort of new with information. I can't go a ton into it really. It's a bit of information kind of leaking out there. It's a project that we've kind of had simmering in the back burner, as we tend to do for a little while, and so played around with something more on screen than anything some while ago. As you say, Dagger's got some fantastic history in that category, sort of going all the way back, and I think. Someone might pull me up in history, but the last true full slice would have been the id series. There were things like the Juice and the RX, but they were a little bit more sort of volume in certain areas for sort of downriver capabilities. So true full slice would be the id, and that's got a lot of playboat style to it, I think, if you look at it, rather than sort of length for its slice.
I draw the line at the ego. Yeah.
Yeah. Although, actually jumped in an id, it's always good to sort of know what sort of went in beforehand and sort of get a feel for it again. And I think sometimes we look at those boats with sort of rose-tinted spectrals and you paddle, it's like, oh yeah, this actually is really cool, or this part doesn't work, and it's really good to familiarize yourself. But the id has some really cool features on certain wave shapes. Like some waves just, I've got paddled on, it fits really, really well, and does some things really cool, and you can really feel that sort of shorter, sort of poppier playboat style to it. But then, obviously then it doesn't quite have the same sort of visual appeal. It's sort of rotating on the tail. It just looks a little sort of short and squat, but cool boat, really, really cool boat. I think it was, probably a little overshadowed by some other sort of boats at the time, and other sort of boats in sort of Dagger's own range, like short boats really came in, and people were like, what do we need that thing for nowadays? And but it's fun. I'm actually trying to get my hands on one soon. Don't tell my wife, just add to the boat collection. She'll be like, what do you need that for? I was like, because.
I have one of size I re-outfitted that everyone hates, but you would both fit in it. So
yeah,
I can get you one down there.
Exactly. There we go. But so kind of that was the last sort of foray that Dagger did. So we've got a lot to live up to. But yeah, sort of information at the moment, sort of prototypes in the work, two sizes. Really focusing in on comfort is key. Like I think gone are the days you have to be sort of paying for pleasure in these things. They can still have performance and actually be comfortable. And there's a happy medium, and I think that's what today's consumers expecting. Then really, we say it a lot, but bringing in a safe element to that boat. We can't tell people where they should or shouldn't paddle that style of boat, but there are arenas where people will probably take them that can't condone it and sort of feel comfortable with it, but we want to make it the safest boat possible in what it's doing, and so that's a big aspect of that project. So watch this space on it. It's a fun one. It's good to be sort of testing it. We've got some decent water around, and like with any project, we've got boats kind of all over the States and sort of all over. There's boats kind of all over the world at the moment with that, which is cool.
That's sweet. Yeah, I mean, just the idea of having there have been many that have had a rotomolded seat, but to have one that has a step out pillar in a time and age where we know what people are gonna do with it, is huge. When I personally, when I have started putting outfitting kits into boats that I'm building for friends, have started building in step out pillars, because I know, like it's just the reality. So super, super happy to see that decision. I know it can't be an easier one, because you are weighing the boat down by 3 or 4 pounds to do that. But I hope people understand the longevity of the boat, the safety of the boat, the durability of the boat. It's all there.
And we're looking at that aspect from the ground up. So we've got existing components, and they would sure work, but we're actually going to try and make it so that it's functional, it's practical, but we're not bringing a huge weight penalty to the table. And we think there's a balance to be had in there, and we feel comfortable with it, that it's it's the right choice to make for that boat. So we're got a cool teams working on that project, and it's it's going to be a fun one. And we know that the market, lots of people get really super excited about it, and it's something that we know we need in the Dagger range, and sort of a hole to fill. We also know it's potentially lower on the totem pole in terms of sales, but it's again, it's that legacy sort of side of things. We want it to sort of help round out the range, and as soon as kind of word start to get out there's a lot of excitement, and see what attention it draws, and hopefully at the end of the day that excitement turns into people getting out and buying it, and buying into boats that are, you know, slowly just don't exist, right? You know, the used market in those slicey boats is they're getting less and less available. They definitely getting less and less safe as they see more, you know, that plastic gets older and sees more time in the sun, and it's time to sort of, you know, buy into new. And yeah, if Dagger can make an offering there, as have other companies, then great.
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on. Your ability to go out and just pick up an Ultrafuge or pick up an Ego is non-existent. I found a, you know, dream American flag honcho, and I punched a hole in the bow the very first time I was out. You know, like, the plastic isn't there. It was not as good, and it has now aged 20 years, you know. So the idea that you can go out and buy one with a warranty that you don't have to re-outfit is, hopefully people appreciate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, my only last question was going to be just what is your process going from someone, you know, Scott or whoever says, this is the hole in our lineup, you know, or whatever it is. Like, so right now, like, the Jitsu is the oldest thing in your lineup, I think, in the Whitewater realm. Someone comes to you, says,
the torrent, really, you know, the Whitewater Silon, which was originally the Perception boat. So
right.
Maybe we don't count. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example too. So, you know, and I've teased you on or off camera before, like, where's my 8-foot torrent? You know, so how does that process work for you? You know, 8-foot torrent, go. Do you just start in CAD and start sporting around? Do you go find a torrent and cut 2 feet out of it like they used to do in the old days and start welding? How does your creative process work?
Yeah, it's there's different aspects to it depending, I suppose, on what that boat is, how close to the previous model. Let's say it is following on from a previous model that we are, and usually with Dagger, you know, a little slower on our rotation, so there's some time in between. Absolutely looking at what the competition's doing, because don't we all? We it's not that we're sort of going to follow that direction exactly, but you have to know your sort of competitive analysis and sort of say, well, that's working, that's great, and you know, that appeals to this consumer, and knowing that customer is really important. And so that's definitely a collective approach. It's from, you know, research done with retailers and saying, hey, these people are buying these boats and they're coming in and they're using it for this, and just being on the water as well. We see a ton of that. I mean, there's a collective group with it. Obviously our team paddlers are sort of eyes and ears for sure, and you know, what they see and hear oftentimes first is super vital. So then it's a case of like, okay, we've got this idea, is this the right sort of direction? What have we got in the Dagger range that sort of is a starting point, and oftentimes paddle those boats again. I'd not been in the Mamba, for example, for the longest time. I used to paddle out on everything. I used to creek in that and used to choose that kind of over the Nomad, really. It's just sort of more my style. Until I realized I was getting a little undergunned in it, possibly in the Mamba 8.1. But before starting the Code project, I actually got to jump in one again. It was one of Todd Wells's boats down in Costa Rica. So Adrian and I went and did an overnight paddle, and the boat that was available was a Mamba 8.1. And so it was really cool to sort of just jump in that and familiarize yourself. So that gives a lot of directions. Like, okay, there's a product that's gone before it. What did it do well? What did it not do well? We look at ourselves a lot because, you know, those people buy Dagger boats for various reasons, and they like aspects of them. And so we have a style and a feel, and we're not going to suddenly lose all that. We'll you know, give people that sort of feeling that they're looking for. But yeah, see what's gone before. Sometimes it comes down to, like, you know, Frankensteining old boats into sort of rough prototypes, sort of adding bits and pieces here and there. But so much of it now is definitely, you know, on-screen CAD driven. You can visualize something really quickly, make sort of changes, see what it looks like. we'll do scale models as well sometimes. But you know, R&D process with Dagger is really polished, and there's a awesome group of folks who sort of drive that and do a great job at it. So we can get to prototype really quickly, and that's worth a lot. Like seeing something on screen is one thing, but really getting a feel for it in the proper material, like we get there as quickly as we can. That's for sure.
So you're saying I can have a new Jitsu before Bussy season?
Yeah, yeah, we could probably make that happen. Yeah.
I'm gonna hold it. All right.
And in plastic and carbon.
Time's ticking. We don't have time. No time.
Get right on it.
That was, I think that was everything I had for you. I really appreciate your time as always. And yeah, I think everyone's just looking forward to a time and age where there isn't such a demand and we can actually get, butts and boats. So here's the end of it, dude.
Yeah, thanks for the time, and thanks for chatting. It's an exciting time. There's lots of demand for product, and trying to deliver to that demand is one side of things, but also then trying to maintain it. After the sort of the surge is like, how do we keep people sort of coming back for more, and that's important. So yeah, it's fun to see new people and people just getting that stoke again. It's great.
I could talk about that for hours. How do we harness this? I mean, boats have never flown out on cars the same way that they are now. Anyone who's seen a boat store in the last 2 years, people aren't selling boats, they're unwrapping boats. That's it, and how do we do that conversion? I have no idea. Here's looking at you, Rush. I hope Netflix has an impact.
Yeah, that's just going to add to that demand. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, the movie itself is just fantastic and super cool, but just like where that's going to reach and who it's going to penetrate and the sort of the inspiration that's going to drive. I think that's it's hard to sort of put a sort of a number value to what that would look like, but I think the industry's got to sort of take that and bring new people in and maintain it as well somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be a deliverance moment. I mean, everyone in the industry talks about deliverance as the moment that the American family bought a Grumman aluminum canoe and the paddle sports industry was born, which still just, I don't know if it's a generational thing. I don't understand it. But if you told me that COVID was the rebirth of the, this century's outdoor movement, here's hoping, but I hope my eddies don't get too full.